All right. Well, thank you, Cyrus. First of all, thanks very much to the BIS group and for you, Cyrus, for getting all of this together. I'm sure we're going to be thanking Alison profusely, but I know you're incredibly busy and a new mom and got all of those kinds of things to do. So, and it's 6 o'clock. So we really appreciate your joining us. But I really wanted the PAU community to learn about your experience. I have followed your journey somewhat from the sidelines. I knew Alison at Stanford when she was in eating disorders, and our first connection was actually around work she had done with prevention, and she did really wonderful things when she was at Stanford, and she remains a clinical research psychologist and adjunct professor there. I should just back up a little bit and say that Alison got her PhD from the University College Dublin, and then came here to the department and doing a lot of other cool things that I won't mention. And then I think was entranced by the possibility of how we can deliver mental health services at very low cost to very large populations. So she founded and became the president of Woebot, a really interesting company that seems to be doing very well. I love your note on your website, Alison, that tiny conversations to feel your best. You know, this would be warm to Ricardo Munoz's heart, because he really believes in tiny conversations delivered to very large populations. Woebot, amongst other things, was a Google Play Award winner in 2019, and it was an app of the day in the App Store. And I think the app has been used by a whole bunch of people. So, Alison, again, thank you so much and welcome. And I really look forward to hearing your story. And I'll turn it over to Dr. O'Connor. And thank you very much. I should also want to thank PAU, the Med Tech group in general, I4 Health, and again, in particular, Cyrus and the students for putting this together. And you, most of all, Alison, for taking the time to help us think about psychology and technology. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Bar. Really appreciate it. This is, as Cyrus said, our fourth superstar psychologist in technology, and we really have been blessed to have incredible superstars join us, and no less today. I've had the chance to talk with Alison, and I know you're going to be very, very impressed and intrigued by the work that she's done and the work she's continuing to do. So I thought we would start, Alison, by having you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, kind of your, what we've tried to look at over the last few times is the career path from graduate training in research and psychology to your postdoc at Stanford. So then we'll get to Woebot, but how did that happen?
Sure. Oh, thank you very much, by the way, Bar. What a great intro. And I'm just, I'm so thrilled to be here. I never thought I'd see the day where there were superstar psychologists, right? Like, that's, to say the least, that is not why we get in the field. Yeah, I guess my trajectory has just been all over the map. So, I guess, where shall I start? So yeah, I did undergrad psychology at UCD Dublin, where I'm from, and then I thought I was going to do clinical neuroscience, and I loved that part of my undergrad degree. So I applied for a clinical neuroscience PhD program in the UK, and so on the way there, I decided I'd take a few years off and work in the real world, as it were. And so I got a job. I taught myself to code, and I got a job in an investment bank in London, building decision support software for bankers. It's a very bizarre side kind of thing. But it was actually towards the late 90s. So it was the dot-com boom, and it was a really interesting time for tech, because there was all of this great optimism about the internet, and a lot of skepticism too. But great optimism about how the internet was going to transform all sectors, and it's very similar to the way we talk about AI now, which is interesting. But I was a horrible coder, and but somehow they just wanted me to stay. But what happened was our investment bank got taken over by a larger investment bank, and while all our projects were scrapped, we still had to come to work, and I had nothing to do. And so a friend of mine, her mother actually set up a support organization, a like nationally funded support organization for people with eating disorders. And she happened to be in London, and we were having dinner, and she said, you know, we just can't make the in-person support group model work. It's like, it's taking, we're losing our shirt on it. Basically, all of our funding is going to these rural support groups, and, you know, population density problems and stigma means that no one's showing up. And so at the time we thought, ooh, maybe we'll make a online support group. And it was very cutting edge at the time, in 99. And it actually was, I mean, what I loved about that, so I said, geez, I have nothing to do. I've got to go to work every day, and I have these new skills. So looked into it, and, you know, built the online support group, which still is there today. But that exercise of looking at what is helpful of the in-person experience and how you might translate it to a digital forum, and, you know, taking the things that the unique opportunities that you have actually with technology, and how can you enhance the experience, and also how can you use it to fix the problems of the in-person experience, which there are several, and particularly for eating disorders, it was an interesting thing. The sort of the different diagnoses didn't like being in the room with each other, and you could remove the body for an online support group, which was amazing, you know. So what we thought it was, and yeah, so I really enjoyed that. And then I just thought, well, I just love this work now. So I went back to do a research master's, really to evaluate how that particular service was doing in the population. And then after that, I kind of was offered a PhD, sort of, yeah, to build a CBT program in an inpatient setting for people with chronic anorexia. And yes, that's what I did for my PhD, even though, you know, from that I learned that you shouldn't do an inpatient CBT program for people with anorexia. Just like, that is not the right setting for CBT. And like, this was interesting, because then I was like, okay, we cannot be trying to intervene with people who've had this illness for 10 or 12 years. And also hospitals, geez, can we not do something a little earlier, right? Because we were seeing people who'd been ill for about 10 years. So anyway, long story short, went over to Stanford then to do a postdoc with Jim Locke. And actually, Stanford, the reason why I thought about Stanford in the first place, I'm going to embarrass you, Bart, was because when I did that first research master's, we couldn't find, you had to find an external examiner. And there was no one in Ireland that had the expertise of like tech in psychology, or how we might use tech for a psychological purpose, and particularly in eating disorders. And there was no one in the UK with that expertise either. And so where was there? The only place probably on the planet was Bar Taylor's lab. And so my university reached out to somebody in Bar's lab who ended up being my external examiner. And he emailed, and he said, you know, we don't do PhD programs here, but you should really consider coming over for a postdoc. And so I was just, you know, I mean, that's where everything, even from support group theory, you know, Irv Yalom's like early work, and just, you know, the amazing things that Bar's group were doing. I was like, this is the center of tech in the world. That's where I'm going to go. And I went to Jim's group instead, because he had an easier time with my visa. And yeah, it was great. Then I got to do loads of really interesting stuff at Stanford. Initially, you know, just kind of the training in being a very good, you know, clinical research psychologist. Like, how do you be a good scientist? How do you set up really great treatment outcomes research? And I was always I was telling Maureen the other day, I was always trying to slip in tech. Like, could we do a little post-hospitalization thing? And, you know, in the early days, everyone Bar Taylor, except for Bar, would be looking at you like, what? You know, what? And then slowly, I think over the years, like, it became more of a viable prospect, which was really interesting. And of course, Jim was very supportive as well. And so yeah, I got to make little things here and there, and like play around with developing a lot of different kind of technical applications, starting off with a smartphone app for eating disorders treatment as an adjunct to help adolescent patients track their eating over time. And And then, we have a real problem with scaling expertise, particularly for anorexia nervosa for adolescents. And so I used, MOOCs had just become a thing at the time. And I'm so honored to see Ricardo Muniz here. I'm just like kind of intimidated with everybody, but I know this is but yeah, it was very, very interesting. MOOCs were launched, and the Coursera had launched, and a few others, and I thought, this is an intriguing thing. Like, why aren't we should just teach clinicians this way. And what I liked about it was the peer group sort of design for learning, because I thought, well, if you look at the postdocs, why the postdocs at Stanford and Chicago, why we're good is because we have a lot of exposure to a lot of cases and a lot of peer supervision. And so we did that, and it was great. And actually I just fell in love with this potential to, like, the potential of MOOC methodology to address this issue we have of scale. And so I created a version to treat anorexia itself, which was also kind of contraindicated at the time because people were saying this is way too medically difficult to treat on the internet. But I treated, the model of family-based treatment is actually one in which you were training, you're helping the parents step into the role of being empowered enough to re-nourish their child. And it just worked so well. And all of the things that people tell you about tech, like, oh geez, family-based treatment, that sounds strange to do that over the internet. You couldn't, that's very, that would seem, but it's so removed and it's so impersonal. But in actual fact, what was happening was what's happening now. We're all looking at each other's kitchen tables. You are really in the family home, and it sort of created this level of intimacy that I think was very different to what we expected, and we did really well in that trial, and that work is still continuing, I'm happy to say, in Jim's lab. But ultimately, sorry, this is a much longer story than I think.
No, I don't want to interrupt because it's the flow of it is so great. But it does occur to me that was sort of the pinnacle of what most of us would expect to reach in terms of having federal grants, being able to innovate, being able to do the research you want to do, develop these really innovative trials, and all of that was working really well for you. And so you had this successful career, and I guess what I want to know now is, what was that thing that said to you, I'm going to leave this amazing academic environment with all my grants and things and go over here into this other space? Like, what was that decision like?
There were a couple of things. There were a few things, I think, because this is sometimes I'm always asked, like, when was the lightning moment? And I'm always thinking, like, have you ever had a moment? It's never like lightning. It's not. So, well, for me it wasn't. It was a slow kind of tear away of a band-aid. But there were a few. When I look back, there were a few key moments for sure. One of them was actually the experience of building that smartphone app in 2010. And at the time I met a person who was doing a graduate school of business course, Jenna Tregarthen. And she said, I kind of want to do an app for eating disorders as well. And I said, oh, this is great. Like, so we became friends, and it's like, this is what we've done. And then a few months later, she's like, yeah, we launched something as well. And in a few months of launching it in the world and getting feedback and iterating, they had built something so much more sophisticated and had thousands of users, whereas I was still struggling with the university security to get it behind Stanford firewall. And it was the first moment, because I always think, taking a step back, I mean, certainly at some point there's this kind of idea that we have that academia is like, it's just all sort of very the pursuit of knowledge and very pure, and with just no profit motive, and that industry is like, president, business, profit motive, like, sell your grandmother. And actually those two worlds are not so different, and actually intersect beautifully, particularly in the Bay Area, which is really special. But this is the first time I saw the value really in front of me in a very tangible, concrete way of, okay, developing something within an academic setting versus developing it outside, and the advantages there. And I always thought I had this very fixed mindset around, you must have clinical evidence first before you launch something. But I saw also a value in just being patient-centered, which is not how we typically develop treatments in a radical way. You know, it's quite it's a process that comes from like, what is the next thing that the literature suggests we should build, and what is the theory around this great treatment and things. But so I actually went over then to the D school, and I started hanging around some of those classes and learned to do person-centered design. And I became obsessed with the idea, the problem of engagement, actually, because I think, you know, engagement is the ultimate issue really in anything, and mental illness is a state of disengagement in lots of ways, particularly, you know, something like depression or anxiety. You know, you could imagine it's a state of disengagement from the concrete here and now. And so then I actually was very intrigued by, there's a few things. I actually treated a patient who was a teenager with a teenage boy with autism and bulimia, and his like special area of interest ended up was exercise. And because he had a lot of learning disabilities as well, and because of that I was treating him with CBT, and we did the entire sort of treatment through like drawing pictures and in a visual way. And it was incredible, the normal way that I was trying to kind of communicate cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually quite like, it can be quite abstract, you know, and it's quite intellectual. It's kind of the Daniel Kahneman's thinking slow, but making it into pictures, into images. I mean, he just got the concept. And so this kind of seed was planted that particularly for young people, you know, we might not have a good model in treatment. If you look at the design of treatment, it's probably not that suited to that population. Like if you were to bring in a bunch of product designers and say, you know, we need you to elicit this, this, and this, they would probably not do it through two people in a room, one 3 times the age of the other, you know, one completely peer driven and the other, you know, not. So it was a design challenge. So then learning to be a designer, and actually I got really into game design. So I was convinced that gaming, like the game model and the potential therein would be the formula.
And, you know, we had our last superstar psychologist was a user X in the user X world, and exactly what you said he echoed, which is he sits in a room with all these people who think they're the experts, but if you're thinking about the the person using the experience, it doesn't always translate, right? And all of that led you to go into this startup mode.
Yeah, that's right. So I also, my work was leading to larger and larger data sets, and I also really like honestly the statistical part of the being a psychologist. I loved all the stats. I did, and so then I became really intrigued with machine learning as well, and particularly natural language processing as it maps to cognitive behavioral therapy. I just thought, well, there's a really interesting match here, and so but actually, as part of an NIH trial, I was looking for someone who did machine learning on campus. And so I just Googled it and I found this guy, Andrew Ng, and I was like, oh, there's a phone number. So I just rang him, and he answered the phone. And I come to understand that apparently you don't ring Andrew Ng. It's like it's just not something that's done. He actually says it on his website, please do not ring me. I get 20 inbound requests, and I'm like, you know, this is very interesting. So, but we just started talking and really hit it off. And he ran the AI department prior to Feifei Li at Stanford. He founded the Google Brain Project, and so a lot of Google's AI effort came from him. And so we started talking about the intersection of our two fields. And he was really interested in weight loss and was, I think, trying to convince me to do something in weight loss. And like, you know, I was like, I've treated so many people with anorexia. I'm not going to do that. I'm not interested in weight loss personally, but mental health is something that you should like broader. And so we spent, you know, several months trying to convince the other to do the work that we were really interested in. And then eventually I went over there for half time and ran his health innovation group, where we had his grad students sort of we looked at different areas of where there were big problems in behavioral health in particular, and that was just really fun. But all the while, I just was slowly realizing, the kinds of things I really want to do are not going to happen here. One of those other moments as well, and I asked Bar's permission to say this, but one of the moments that stuck out to me too was when myself and Megan Jones had this great idea to do a digital innovation lab where we would evaluate all of these startup ideas, because we were having a steady stream of these sort of CEOs come by and these founders come by and ask our opinions on things. And we thought, well, let's set up an actual formal mechanism. And Bar said, this is all grand, this is all fine and everything's grand, but, he's like, the truth is, and I swear his words are still like embedded in my brain. He said, the truth is that, true innovation is probably not going to happen in a university setting. All of the innovation is actually happening outside. And that was like one of those like bombshell at the time. It's like, oh, and I couldn't shake it. And then, another actually interesting moment that I do look back at too, a similar thing that Andrew Ng said to me on the phone. So I was talking to Andrew one day and I said, so Andrew, what do you think of this grant? So like, as in, will you be on the grant? And I think he misinterpreted my question as like a mentorship question. And he said, well, let me tell you how I think about these things. I always ask myself, like, does this have the potential to be the biggest impact that I'm ever going to make in my lifetime? And if the answer is not yes, like it has to have that potential, then I just don't get involved.
Wow.
And I was sort of, yeah. And I just thought at the time, I was computer scientists. They always think really big, but I could not shake that notion. And it's an interesting kind of way to think about it. But yeah, sorry. Again, I'm kind of going off track here, but long short, all of these things came together, said finally, okay, I need to learn some business skills, went over to the Graduate School of Business, did this very small, short program called the Stanford Ignite, which was great, where they teach engineers and scientists to take something from the lab to market. And it just told me all the breadth of things that I didn't know, but now I knew I didn't know them, which is progress. And then just decided to launch a company afterwards. And before it was a company, it was just a project where me and the only other person I could convince to join me at the time was a new math graduate, but it was a really great, could learn anything overnight. Myself and Pierre around the kitchen table with occasional input from Andrew, just making game prototypes and trying to sell them to people basically, and that for 9 months iterated. We made 13 different CBT themed games, which were as fun as they sound. Yeah, we had our flagship game was Zombies Got Issues, where zombified tech workers are coming at you, and you with distorted thoughts, and your weapons are, you have to name that distorted thought and bring them back to life. But it turns out that adolescents don't want to bring zombies back to life. They want their heads to explode. So eventually that became Woebot. Woebot, yeah. But it's why Woebot is like a gamey kind of gamified sort of experience.
But I mean, I think what's still at the core of what you do, and what I love about this whole story is, and we try to instill in our students, the importance of research, right? Even though eventually you had to move into a different space to really make the big impact, how important has it been that you understood science, you understood the science-driven approaches? How have you been, and how have you been successful at convincing funders, right, that was an important part of your work at Woebot?
Yeah, that's true. I'm so lucky. I think it's the right funders. I mean, it's hugely important. It's been everything. It has been the launch pad. Like, I don't think I wouldn't have gotten anywhere had I not my time at Stanford. Like all the things that I could learn there, the exposure, like the like being able to be there to like witness Bar, Ricardo's work, everybody, like that's mean, and then the D school, just walking over there and being able to just be there and learn this great skill, and the Graduate School of Business. I mean, there's just great minds around the Bay Area in general. And yeah, Stanford really supports it, which is brilliant. And I always found, you know, as I was looking, the further outside of our department I was looking and learning and developing skills, the more relevant within the department I became. You know, so it is this like true, I mean, collaboration, and, you know, innovation really comes from the intersection of two different places. And so there's a lot of people with product design skills. You know, there's a lot of really great designers, and there's a lot of great people in startups, but there aren't too many people who also have a solid scientific sort of treatment development and kind of clinical background as well. That is fairly rare, and that helped a lot. And as for the funders, I mean, I leaned into that a lot when I was going looking for funding. It was a very intimidating thing for me. I had been, you know, it was a lot of fun being around a kitchen table, and even my own friends, like, what is it that you do again? Like, no, you know, really, you're so obscure. And then, you know, doing this tinkering away. And then occasionally Andrew would just connect me with a venture capitalist, and I would walk in there not having any really idea what to expect, and just talk to them. And there is a great phrase that if you ask for advice, you get money, and if you ask for money, you get advice. And that is very, very true. So I was always really good at asking for advice, because I think that's how you further your thinking. And so while we were making games, I'd asked one of these investors that I met for advice, and she just had this like level of understanding about cognitive behavioral therapy and how the form factor for young people is broken, and it certainly could be improved, right? Not for all people, but for a lot of people. And access issues and stigma, it's just, you know, we have to do better addressing that, because the number of people suffering is really increasing so rapidly. And so we had a great chat, and then she actually offered seed investment, which I turned down, which turns out also to be a very good thing to do on your way to sort of raise more money. But yeah, all this to say, when it came to like a real concerted effort, when we knew we were ready to raise money for and actually start a company, there's a great talk by Mark Andreessen, who co-founded a venture firm called A16Z. He also founded Netscape. So one of the real pioneers of the internet. He talked about their thesis and how they invest in people. And he said, you know, we don't look for absence of weakness. You know, we're not looking for good all-round people or good all-round skills. We're looking for the presence of great strength. And you just accept that they're going to have a lot of other areas that they don't know anything about if you're looking for great strength. And I thought to myself, I have that. I have one thing that I know. And Peter Thiel talks about this too in 0 to 1. What is the one thing that you know that the rest of the world would disagree with you on? And if you have that, then that's the basis for innovation. And so when I was doing my pitches, what I did was I just played a Woebot conversation, and I said, I talked them through, this is what this is. This is an invitation step. This is, you know, paradoxical agenda setting. This is what I'm doing here. And this is, and showed them, I was really showing them, this is not as easy as it appears. And there is some expertise here. And please don't ask me for a financial model, because I don't have that, but I have this.
You know, what I love about that is, you know, sometimes people ask me, like, why is doctoral training take 5 or 6 years or more, right? You know, and it's because of the depth of that knowledge that you expect people to have when they're treating people, right? I mean, it's a huge, especially if you do science and the, you know, clinical work, science, and have a commitment to service. So, I mean, it's really, exactly. Actually, Ricardo wants to know why you would turn down seed money. Why would that be a good thing?
That's a great question. I think I knew we weren't, it didn't feel right at the time. And I just didn't think we were ready. We just weren't ready. And I thought, I talked it over with Andrew, and he just said, like, well, just, if you don't feel ready, like, wait until you have more metrics, and then just, you know, and then have a better, because we hadn't, I think I also had a plan. I wanted to create something that I was comfortable with and then evaluate it in a trial and then see if it was work. I mean, I still believe that you should validate things really before you bring them to market. And that's what I wanted to do. And so they wanted to invest while it was still at the prototype stage. But I really wanted to know that I had to be able to be confident to say, look, this is actually going to be impactful. So I wanted to do a study first. So I did. Just a few weeks later, actually, we built a Woebot prototype, and I could see immediately that people were responding totally differently. And so quickly made a research version, did the randomized control trial. And so it was only maybe 3 months later, I was back in her office with a much more compelling reason to invest in us. And that round ended up being very different.
I love that. And Kyle has asked a question, which I think is a great question to follow up here, which is, you talk about really digging into what you know and being clear, right, about your strengths and what you know. But you also had learned coding, you had, done design thinking, you've done these other things. So how important is it, do you think, for our students, and others starting to think about these things, for them to have the sort of adjunct expertise at least a little bit, or do they have to be able to communicate effectively with people in that realm, or or can you just collaborate to get there? I guess that's part of it. I've added that to Kyle's question.
That's it. I think you can, I mean, gosh, like I'm certainly no expert, so I'm sort of just speaking from my journey. And I do think it's one of the really challenging things. I'm becoming to appreciate that a lot of companies talk about how challenging it is to actually integrate, domain expertise with, good product design, product development, and engineering. And certainly for me, it's been really helpful, but being a founder and a CEO is very different to going and joining a company, which I hope if any of you are looking for jobs, you will apply to us. Because you can learn, you do, as long as you just have to know that these other things exist and how important they are and why they exist, just like any, system. But it's fun.
I think that actually answers a couple of the questions we're having. But I wanted to have you take just a brief moment to at least just tell us all, in your kind of your elevator pitch about what Woebot is, just for those who might not be as familiar with it, just because where you ended up was there. So how would you describe that?
I know I always cringe at this, so I'm really bad at the elevator pitch. But Woebot is Woebot's a platform for emotional support, delivered in a conversational, interface. It's just a conversation, and it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy. Though we do have DBT and some IPT as well for grief and loneliness. And it's AI ML powered, so there's very specific places in which we have pretty accurate algorithms running for things like understanding really what the problem is that the person is bringing to you. And now what wellness that you see on the market, that's a free app available there. There's also actual clinical programs that we triage to that are going through a regulatory process right now. So our first indication is postpartum depression, which we've done another randomized control trial on and are bringing to the FDA. And other ones for depression, substance use, teen depression.
So looks like a lot of the folks joining us tonight use Woebot in some way or another. So
that's great. Thank you.
And several people have mentioned how much they appreciate it. And one person wondered, is there a worry about people becoming dependent on it? Like, how do you think about it as sort of over time? Is it something people will, how do you think about that?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. I don't worry about people becoming dependent on Woebot, because we actually design each encounter to be fairly short. In fact, if anything, people want to talk to Woebot more, but we don't want to keep people in the app, and we have a lot of focus on in real life generalization of skills. And in fact, that's really something that we think is a really great opportunity that I don't see a lot of apps doing. It's a hard problem, you know. There are other chatbots that do try and keep people in the conversation as long as possible. But I just don't agree with that. I think it's a little strange. I'm very old school, really, psychologist, you know. I still believe that, you know, there's no replacement for human connection. But I do think what comes up a lot is this question of whether there's a risk that someone would use Woebot rather than see a therapist.
Well, that was kind of my next question, right? We're working now at PAU to develop, we're really in the throes of developing a wonderful e-clinic, part of which will be blended therapy and how to help teach our students how to use these sort of adjunct, you know, therapy tools. Yeah. But, you know, part of that's sort of, where is that balance, right?
I mean, I think it's such a good question. Like, first of all, I mean, I'd love to see any data that suggests that that's actually a risk. I haven't yet. And actually, we have a lot of our users will say, and we really designed Woebot to be, I mean, we wanted it to be like the gentlest on-ramp ever. Like, we call it sometimes like a gateway therapy. We want to give people a great positive experience, because I think, and this is from my experience of treating people with anorexia, a lot of whom had just the worst experience in therapy. And then I think the worst thing you can do is give people the impression that they're beyond help, right? So, oh, I tried CBT, it's not for me, it doesn't work for me. That's a very dangerous place to be. So we wanted to give people a very positive experience, and also engage those who wouldn't otherwise be able to share what's going on with anyone, the opportunity to do so in this like really easy, non-stigmatized way. But yeah, I sometimes, this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, and I need a better analogy, but I often think like this kind of thing about this narrative about chatbots replacing therapy, it's a bummer, because I do think we missed the opportunity to really get deep into where the advantages and limitations are, because that's really the case. It's almost like saying, you know, that sandwiches will take over restaurants, and, you know, and they won't. The truth is, sandwiches and Michelin star restaurants coexist quite nicely. But right now we have this sort of narrative that's very close to saying, like, every time somebody is suffering, they must go to the therapist, which is like saying every time you're hungry, you must go to a Michelin star restaurant, when a sandwich will do just fine. And honestly, there would be less pressure on our systems, and our specialists would have, you know, would be able to deal with the really difficult and complex cases that should see a person, if we were able to more freely be okay with people having sandwiches.
Well, I mean, that actually goes to my next question for you, really related to this, which is, you know, we spend a lot of time at PAU talking about equity and inclusion, and particularly mental health equity. Certainly Bar's work, Ricardo's work, Eduardo's work, you know, many of our folks are working really hard to think about access, right? So it seems to me throughout your career, even when before you were, you know, had your degrees, you were thinking about access. For those, and for where traditional face-to-face therapy either isn't available or might not work the best. So do you have any insights or advice about how we can help train our students to think about mental health equity and access to care? Like, what's the right way to think about that in terms of what you just said? Like, should we be, like, I feel like we sort of target toward the Michelin, you know, we're trying to get students to be really well-trained, deeply well-trained clinicians, particularly in our graduate programs in counseling and psychology. But, you know, I don't know, how do you think about mental health equity in this sphere?
Gosh, and I think that's, the access was when I was joking with Maureen that my mentors, academic mentors, used to always say, like, look at your CV, this just doesn't make any sense, it's all over the place. And looking back, it was all about access, you know, and it made perfect sense. It was all about what are the barriers that prevent somebody from getting care, and how do you sort of work on those. So I think that in terms of the correct way to think about disparities of access is to think about it. You know, number one is actually think about it, because most people aren't, right? And I think the correct way is, I mean, the strength for this group is that you're taught how to do the Michelin star treatment, because you have to know what that looks like. And And I think, and to know what things can you task shift away, just having an open mind and saying, well, what parts really, and it's surprising, I think, and having an open mind about the kinds of things and the kinds of advantages that non-human interventions or systems can provide, because I've been surprised just in my own work. I've been surprised with some of the things that has emerged from the data, and I think we'll just, everything is a changing target too. Like this moment now, the last 6 weeks has completely shifted the conversation. We've seen it at the federal agency level, even the big payers and insurance companies. It's just, nobody's actually wondering now about, well, is this kind of safe? We have this unprecedented moment where we have huge need for mental health services, a need for them to be digital, and at scale now, like quickly, so it's just interesting. So I don't know if that was a very good answer. I mean,
I think it's important to think about it. I mean, keep it in the top of our minds, but also recognize the value of sort of understanding where it all fits in the scale. A couple of questions have come in about Woebot in terms of where you think it's heading. Like what's next? Eduardo mentioned he used it earlier. It looks different now. Like where do you think your ideas are going with your company?
Well, we're developing we're developing Woebot into being digital therapeutic kind of capability. So there will always, I think, be this nice gentle on-ramp, Woebot sort of wellness. And I think then what emerged from our data were clearly like two sort of different groups. One, people who want that kind of everyday mental health promotion, subclinical problems, the sort of everyday diagnosis human. That's what which was kind of the thesis we went out with, like, listen, this is not about, we're agnostic to diagnosis. This is about just the human condition. We all have distorted thinking. We're all going to go through a loss. We're all going to experience stress. And so how could we change the conversation just to make it really normal for us to look after our mental health on a daily basis? But then there was definitely another group that are looking for something a bit more. They are looking for prescription strength programmatic content where we are explicit about talking about your symptoms. We're not agnostic to diagnosis anymore. We're like, okay, the diagnosis actually provides a lot of information about how one should be treated and the course of illness and everything. And it looks much more like a structured treatment. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we've built some of those programs for some of the indications that we've seen, as I mentioned, postpartum depression, which is just something that's not really treated systematically, and for which there's only one FDA-approved treatment, which is a 72-hour infusion that requires hospitalization. And yeah, so it's very, so there's a certain need for alternatives. So we'll see a lot more, I think, therapeutic indications, and we created a web tool that then got translated into Italian and integrated into the Italian Health Ministry's websites, which we were really proud of. And so the number one request we get for Woebot is translation to different languages. So when Woebot's done learning English, I think we might translate to other languages. You'll just get, Woebot will just become more skilled as a clinician, right? Just more, I will build out more DBT skills. I mean, Athena Robinson, really you should have Athena on here. She's just much more skilled than me, but she's our chief clinical officer. Athena is really amazing at dialectical behavior therapy, has done a lot of that treatment development work. So she's building that out. And we were able to do IPT through Woebot, which I thought was very, very cool for grief and loneliness and relationship problems.
Well, I'll do just a brief PAU advertisement here, and two things. First of all, I want to mention Professor Aline Barrera's work on postpartum depression, and she has some really interesting, important interventions going on that. And second, in our continuing professional studies side of the house now, we offer a DBT certificate, and we're trying to make sure that because very few people have gotten enough training in that in their graduate training, so we're trying to supplement that. So somebody asked, Kate asked a question that I'm curious about. So you are obviously the founder and CEO of Woebot. You're still the president, but it sounds like you have a larger structure now. So how has your role evolved at Woebot?
It's a great question. We brought in another CEO about a month ago, and it's been fantastic. Michael Evers, he's coming from a really great background in health technology, and I'm the president, which we're still trying to figure out what that is. I still do what I do, but I get to. I'm the president. I get to. I basically work a lot on, big strategic questions and product development, and Michael does the, financial modeling and all of the other stuff about being a CEO, that I was very happy to have off my plate. So
that's great.
We're growing pretty quickly, and. Yeah, the next couple of years, I think, are going to be, really pivotal for us.
Well, that's a great segue to our question, to my next question for you, which is, so first of all, how do you have job openings? That's one of the questions. Yes. But I think the broader part of that is, how can we, first of all, what advice do you have for our students as to how they can explore these interests? Like, how would they even think about being ready to apply to Woebot? What are you looking for when you?
I mean, I would just encourage you to reach out. We definitely are. We are hiring for the clinical team in particular, actually. So it could be a really good time. And Athena was very excited when she heard that I was doing this talk, and was like, make sure you tell people we're hiring. In terms of advice for us, I think just to reach out and have a chat. I think you'll find a very interested, humble group of people who, we really have a really nice culture. It's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of really smart people. But for pursuing ideas in general, I mean, we're so lucky, aren't we? I would say that I don't know. It's just go down. Is this terrible advice? But I actually just think the luckiest thing that I've been able to do is be able to follow things that I was truly interested in. And I understand that this is because I come from a certain level of privilege, right? Like, third level education was free in Ireland. My postgraduate studies were also unpaid or free, and I had scholarships and stuff. So I was very lucky. But the best thing for innovation is just to have a baby in the background. No, sorry. Owen, did you want to say something? Sorry. Well, he's actually bringing to a good point. Complaining about something, right? Like, knowing that something is not right is the best. And I think just leaning into that, like, if you have a feeling that like there's just something wrong about the way we're doing something, and even if it's an inkling, that seed can grow over time. That's one thing, I think. I also think, and actually there's a great James Murphy, the lead singer of LCD Sensors, has this great quote, like, the best way to complain is to make something. And I love that. It's such great creative energy. So like being contrarian and creative, that's a great combination. The other piece that I feel is that just this experience, and this is a bit like ethereal and existential, but this experience of being on the outside. So as a psychologist in a psychiatry department even, or like when all my friends were clinical psychologists and I was a clinical research psychologist, like the experience of being sort of, or that feeling of being sort of on the outside a little bit, is just there's a lot of value in that. You know, it allows you to see things as an observer, and really understand systems in a different way, because you can see the air other people are breathing and they can't see the air they're breathing. Does that make any sense?
No,
So I often think there's a lot of great strength in being an outsider.
And I think it's really important for university for us to hear this, because I think the unfortunate model in so much of academic work is that singularity, right? Is, you know, such tunnel vision focus kind of thing. And what you're really saying is, if you're in that world, you can't, you know, swim the rest of the sea. So I think it's really, I think it's important to say that you, that anyway, I think it's important to say people need to take risks. It sounds like take some chances, get out of their comfort zone a little bit.
Absolutely. And learn about different fields, you know, that are vaguely interesting. You know, I think as psychologists, like I do have a lot of friends who are engineers, and you know, it's a funny thing. You're like, oh, you're engineering. Like the way of thinking is just very, very different. But I think just leaning into that, you know, that's just diversity, right? You know, there is a reason why diverse opinions around the table produces a better result, and diversity is on all kinds of continua, I guess.
How do you think psychologists, you know, in the time you've been in Silicon Valley, for example, you know, what's the role of psychology and psychologists over time? You know, has it changed? Do people understand what we do? You know, is sort of, you know, how do you think the high-tech sector has, you know, sees psychology and counseling, you know, sort of mental health, I guess, generally?
I think we are definitely getting more and more valued all the time, for sure. I mean, that exposure, that learning in what they call in industry behavioral health, because I suspect they're afraid to say mental health, but the dynamics of learning. I mean, I think that's what like differentiates like psychologists, that we're really interested in how people learn, and you know, even learning in a therapeutic setting, and how people relate. And you know, these are the truly valuable skills now, that can be applied in so many settings. Like I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be in our field, and it's never been more valued, you know. And I think also what we've noticed, I mean, this is something that I can speak to from our data too, is that we're seeing a lot more people wanting, for want of a better phrase, skills before pills. Like I think people are leaning into the actual therapeutic approaches now in a way that they may not have been before, and people are not wanting to sort of go down other avenues of treatment before they try things. And yeah, I mean, there's some really good stuff out there too.
Well, and people are really interested in the fact that you said there may be job openings and there's sort of interest, but one question has come in about, you know, how much do you have to have a track record in doing some of this work, right, before someone would come to you successfully? You know, do they have to have worked in one of the labs at PAU where they've been able to do this, or do they have to have worked at some kind of other project or start, you know, how do you, you know, how does that play into the evaluation of candidates?
I'll tell you how we evaluate candidates. It is actually not from what you've done, but whether you can do what it is that you know the role entails. So it's not the track record. It's can you do it? And in some cases, can you do it with a bit of training? So one of the things I've learned for sure in the last 2.5 years of the company is it's so much more important to have people with the right values. Technical skill can always be taught, but you can't change somebody's like value system or structure. And so where we have ignored that in favor of like great talent, it's always ended up it doesn't work out well. So it's more about, can you do this? And even if the thing that shows that you can do this was like a knitting group in 7th grade, that's good enough, you know.
I would fail miserably if that were. So we're almost out of time, or getting close here, and I wanted to ask you, we called this Superstar Psychologists in Technology. That's our, I think Bar came up with that wonderful title. And we're interviewing a number of people, and actually I really am impressed with the way there are a lot of theme here about the importance of good training. But how could we, what advice might you give us at PAU to support the best research and clinical training experiences to ensure that we continue to produce the people you need, right? Like, what is it you might, you've been in academic settings long enough, how could we improve our curriculum or our approaches or opportunities that might really help students be set up for this type of work?
I mean, I love that you're doing this at all. Like, I think this is so interesting and just brilliant, unusual. Yeah, no, and I think it's probably, it is, I think it's having the conversation that you're having and inviting in people from other fields and who have gone from other directions because I think the more you explore the edges of a field, like the more it brings shape to where you're at and what resonates with you, and, all of the different potential pathways, of which there are many, they're such an interesting time. So I think that's what the Valley has that's really unique, is this drive to invite different fields to come together and innovate. And I think as long as we're continuing to explore those opportunities, we'll end up in the right place.
All right. I don't know. Barb, would you like to say a final word as we head out here? I think we're right, Cyrus. We're just about out of time, I think.
Yeah, we're pretty close.
Yeah.
One thing I do like to say is that, thank you guys for joining us, and also just a huge shout out to the PAU's external team. My understanding is they've been doing a lot of work, disseminating the information so that we can get these events going. And also, we also have, don't worry, even though the talk is over, we're having future events too. We're planning some future events, hopefully in the fall as well.
Bar, final thoughts?
I think it's been wonderful. Alison, it's inspiring. I hope you get a chance to read the comments that have been coming in. And I'm very impressed with all of the folks that are listening and part of it, and the engagement, level of interest, the smartness and curiosity, and sort of sense that really we're in a wonderful era. I think it's transformative, and you're one of the people who is leading us forward. And you were just spectacular, Alison. And Marina, as always, you were just totally wonderful. So I just really would like to thank everyone. It was just really great.